So picking up right where we left off, the previous video demonstrated how to have a thruster mechanism. And while it was meant to just demonstrate how to change gravity scale and linear drag in real time, I figured that since that kind of mechanism usually has that gameplay mechanism usually has some kind of limitation, like you only have a certain amount of fuel and the fuel replenishes over time, then rather than starting a whole new series, we can just pick up right here and work with what we have, and with minimal effort, we can actually make this more fully functional. So, first thing we have to do is we have to add some new variables. So up here, we're adding an int, public int fuel, so that's self-explanatory, that's how much fuel you're going to have. Public float total time equals 0. This is going to be a timer. And then public float replenish time. This is also going to be a timer. This timer is going to be used for the depletion of your fuel as it's being used to make sure that it depletes on a consistent basis regardless of frame rate, that it's based on time and not frame rate. And replenish time, same thing, except it's the increase of your fuel in a consistent time-based manner. And I'll explain more of that in a minute. So we'll save that, and it really doesn't do anything other than to create those variables, so I won't run it again. So next, in the input.getKey, we're going to take the variable total time and we increase it by time.delta time. If you haven't seen this before, time.delta time means how much time has passed since the last time update, well in this case it's the update section, since it's run. So in other words, this is a running cum of how much time has passed. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to now, based on that timer, so outside of that if statement but within the update section, if total time is greater than 0.5, so this is arbitrary. I've decided that I want the cycle to be half a second. So total time gets increased when you're holding the key down. So effectively what you're saying is if the key has been held down for half a second, reset it to 0, so it only happens once, and then the cycle has to start over. Decrease fuel by 1, so fuel minus equals 1, and then just to know that it's working, we're going to pop that into the debug log, which shows down here. So debug.log fuel. So as you're holding if you're holding the key down, the timer is increasing. Once it hits 0.5, reset the timer, decrease fuel. The reason why you're basing this on time is, say I just put the decrease here, fuel minus equals 1. This is based on frame rate. So depending on what system you're running this on, the faster your system is running, the more frames you have per second unless you lock the frame rate. So in other words, on a slower system, you would actually thrust for a longer period of time because the decrease would be based on frame rate. So that's why I didn't just put fuel in here. That's why I actually said, okay, let's check based on time. So the next thing we have to do is, now that we've decreased it, actually let's run that. So you can see that in action. So it's not going to affect the character yet, but it will display down here. So 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, negative. So it's just a variable that's changing, but it's changing the way that we want it to change, so it's important to check. Now this is where it really starts to make a difference. So for the input.key, add an open parenthesis, 2 ampersands, because we're going to add a new value. And now let's actually check fuel. If fuel is greater than 0, and then 2 close parentheses. So before we were simply saying if the key is down, go ahead and accelerate. Now we're saying, well, if the key is down and this value has not reached 0, then go ahead and do it. So now watch what happens. Again, debug logs down here, but watch what happens to the character when we get to 0. They run out of fuel and they drop. And automatically it keeps it from getting into the negatives, so it does two things at once. Keeps this from getting into the negatives, the fuel variable from getting into the negatives, and now you have limited thrust. So you could leave it at that and say, okay, you only have a certain amount of thrust, and that's it until whatever, the next level. But let's put in a mechanism for replenishing it. So once this is no longer greater than 0, this no longer happens because this is no longer true, which means this is now happening. So this is where you're going to want to put the replenishment, or at least the timer for the replenishment. So just as we checked total time here, we're going to check replenish, well not check, but we're going to modify replenish time here. Same, time dot delta time. So replenish time is increased by the change in time, how much time has passed since the last time this is run. And now, just because we're lazy, we're going to just copy and paste this. So if replenish time is greater than half a second, then set replenish time to 0. Fuel is increased by 1, not decreased by 1. And again, we post it into the debug log. This might look good, but there's a problem. This just keeps increasing fuel. It doesn't say what the maximum amount of fuel is, so this could actually exceed your maximum. So what you need to do is not just check for replenish time, you need to also make sure that fuel does not exceed whatever the maximum is, and we started at 10. So now this should work. See, it's not exceeding 10, but problem is with our demonstration, it's hard to get down past 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the fuel replenish at a slower rate. We're going to do a full second. So it replenishes slower than it gets expended. See, 0, 1, briefly works. Well, it worked the whole time. It only, what I meant is it briefly lets you thrust again. So let's do this one more time. And at this point, it becomes a matter of game balance as far as what you're trying to do. So for demonstrative purposes, I kind of have to be very particular so it's easy to see what's going on. Okay, so watch. 3, 2, 1, 0, and they start to drop. Starts to increase, and then runs out again and starts to drop. Okay. So that should about do it. You've now added a limitation amount of fuel, and the fuel automatically replenishes on a time. You could certainly replace this with like a collision that you actually have to maybe find a fuel canister. So that should do it.